Welcome to ADHD is Over, a new podcast on a seemingly old label that we're going to be peeling off. Join my wife, Tatiana, and I as we journey with our family, the Wyden family, through the land of confusing information. We're going to visit both sides and let you decide because the power is with you. Welcome to ADHD is Over. Welcome back. I'm excited today. My guest is Howard Neil Glasser, and he's the founder of the Children's Success Foundation and the creator of the Nurtured Heart approach. Howard's background in family treatment, clinical studies, and educational leadership, along with his work with some of the most intense and challenging children, is the basis, the approach that he has now brought to many. He has been referred to as one of the most influential persons working to reduce children's reliance on psychiatric medications. His work is inspiring a growing number of educational and treatment initiatives worldwide and has been featured on CNN, Esquire, and more. Howard is also the author of 18 books, and he told me currently working on 1920, including Transforming the Difficult Child, a long-standing bestseller on challenging children, and he's a sought-after keynote speaker in areas of treatment, educational, and inspiring greatness. Nurtured Heart is currently being researched by Rutgers University, the University of Arizona's Zuckerman School of Public Health, and the New Mexico State University. Currently, Howard teaches certification trainings on the Nurtured Heart approach for the Children's Success Foundation, as well as guest lecturing at Andrew Weil's Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona and their School of Public Health's new Transformational Wellness Program. It is my great pleasure to welcome you, Howard.
Hi, Roman. It's a pleasure to meet you as well. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm excited to dive in. As you know, I've been studying ADHD, and I've been talking to a lot of experts on ADHD, psychology and so forth. But I'm really excited to talk to you because what you teach and what I've read about the Nurtured Heart approach really touched my heart and spoke to me directly, because I've always been feeling that there's more that we can do than just medicate our children, label them and medicate them. So perhaps maybe let's start at the beginning. How did you create, or how did you come up with the Nurtured Heart approach?
I stumbled on it, and here's how. I was not out to develop an approach. I wasn't culling the research for components and theories to plow into a new, philosophy or practice. The way it happened was I was a PhD clinical psych student, NYU, long time ago, and then I innocently took a year off before I finished my doctorate to do my childhood dream of woodworking, which innocently turned into 15 years of fascination with, wood and cabinet making. And I never looked back. And so when I eventually, settled down, began a family, and shook off all the sawdust and fumes, and decided to give it a whirl of getting back in my field of study. I got a job at a family practice clinic, and I had studied many approaches to clinical work. And I think what shook loose over 15 years of being outside the field was I wasn't as deadly loyal to everyone I had studied. So when I tried approach A, B, C, D, E, F, G, when I realized it didn't work, I let go. When I realized I was in a room with real people with real issues with their children, that's what the clinic, that was the feed of referrals our clinic got. When I realized the advice I was giving them was actually innocently making things worse. I kept letting go, trying to find the next try, trying to find the next approach. And finally, it's going to sound like a Seinfeld tape. I had nothing, if you know that reference. It was just me and the family and the kid who was driving them crazy. And I began to see that there were things the parents said, often unbeknownst to them, that pushed the child away. It was almost like the child, got blasted by some unseen force. And I also simultaneously saw there were things parents said, unbeknownst to them, that drew the child in and created some closeness. And I began to realize that there was an energy running underneath what people thought they were saying. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with ways of explaining that to parents. And that was my agenda. It wasn't to create an approach. I mean, I kept honing it, and I kept listening to my inner advice, and I kept honing this. And, after 2 years of working with kids who were primarily ADHD, and seeing that the same intensity that drove parents crazy and that manifested in symptomatology when they first came to me 6 weeks later, 3 months later at most, was the same intensity that was the source of the child's greatness. And that this kid didn't need medication, they didn't need a remedy, they didn't need pathology or diagnosis. After 2 years of working with primarily ADHD kids, and coming to feel like those kids were easy to turn around, then I started getting the next level up. I started getting the case managed kids, the kids who were in more long-standing dire straits, and the kids who had much more concerning, much more deep in symptomatology. And then I got to just notch up what I was doing and hone this. And, it wasn't till 5 years later that I remembered that I had offered, a friend of mine was looking for a name for something. And we were all kind of having this group meditation, and I just suggested to him Nurtured Heart Approach. I remembered that, and I thought, well, that's a perfect fit. I'm going to call it the Nurtured Heart Approach. So in no way, shape, or form was I out to create an approach. It created me. And, I innocently believe that I jokingly say it's my daughter's fault. She willed me to be ready for a great being like her. So really, as the approach developed, it came to be about a deeper level of appreciation beyond thank you, good job, a deeper level of seeing or letting our hearts see the beauty of that individual, see the greatness that's always staring us in the face, that never isn't staring us in the face. It's just that if all we have is normal, limited, conventional, theories of parenting and practices of parenting, it's hard to get to that. It's hard to take advantage of that. And, I'll give you an example by picking on you, Raman. What you've been doing superbly is you've been listening deeply. I want to give you credit for creating the space for that to happen. I don't take that for granted. I've been in a lot of interviews, and I've never so beautifully been given the gift of the space to say what I just said as an introduction. Somehow you hold that space. That reveals to me that you are both a deep thinker and someone who is giving the gift of desiring to know other people's point of view.
Mm.
And I'm not sure what I would call that. It's the greatness of it. There's a tenacious beauty to that quality of enjoying, holding dear to developing a bigger vista, a bigger vantage point.
Mm. Well,
And I see that greatness in you.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. First of all, you're speaking my love language of acknowledgement, so that's beautiful. Thank you. And I will say that in turn, well, if that's called picking on me, then I would love to be picked on by you. But what I saw was it was almost a meta level view when you were speaking, when you were acknowledging me. I was imagining myself as a child being acknowledged for something that in the moment I'm doing well, because I'm not always this good of a listener. My wife will attest. I do often not have the space to be present with her. I'm working on that. But I felt acknowledged, myself. I felt like, maybe I am a pretty good person. Maybe I am present, and maybe I am someone who gives people that space. So is that, in a way, I'm assuming that is a big part of the nurtured heart approach to speak into the greatness of people, right? To acknowledge them, and especially.
Yes. Yeah, and Roman, especially with kids who are symptomatic. So let's say we have in our presence a child, a 12-year-old who is impulsive, is hasty in their decision making, can often be seen as rude and disrespectful. It's so easy in our culture to be annoyed by that and only see those instances. And that's when we accidentally wind up saying so much and giving the gift to them, because we're just merely trying to correct them and steer them in the right direction. But kids put two and two together. Oh, I get a greater gift of dad when things go wrong. What I've learned along the way is when the problems aren't happening is a field day of opportunity to see the beauty of that child. When the disrespect isn't happening, I'm all for parents having a clear rule: no disrespect, no blurting out, no whatever. I feel like right now. Again, let's say you're the 12-year-old. I want to say, Roman, you're not. Right now, you're listening deeply. You're being respectful. It's not a question of whether you can or can't. You are that great quality. And, how not great would it be if you were blurting things out right now? How not great would it be if you were interrupting your sister or annoying her when she's trying to be online for a class? How not great would it be if you were interrupting this podcast? So therefore, how great is it that you're deciding? I want to give you credit for your choice. It's not me who's doing that. It's you who's doing that. I see the beauty of your decision making and what that reveals to me is your kindness and your loving heart that empowers you to be so thoughtful. I see that thoughtfulness in you. Those are great qualities I see in you. And the child, I'm looking for, where do you part the seas? How do you walk through and the crud on one side and the crud on the other side and create a pathway to seeing who this child really is? Not as the bad kid or even the good kid, but the great kid.
And so this is essentially you're not waiting for when the problem is to point the finger or to maybe add some compliment at the end, but you're strengthening the child's confidence by reassuring him or her that they are great and they can pay attention and they are respectful when they are. Yeah.
Yeah, I love dicey words like hijacking. I'm hijacking this kid. I'm being larcenous. I am confronting this child with who I see, and I'm determined that I'm gonna. If I'm on a mission to do that, they can't stop me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Now, what the nurtured heart approach? When I was reading through some of the materials on your website, what struck me, and it was really wonderful, was to read this word intense again and again.
Mm-hmm.
I like that because I think as parents with children that have these symptoms, including our own son, he is intense, and I think often in society that's a bad word. Like, you're too intense.
Yeah.
Or being intense.
Yeah.
How come you chose that word? And I think you talk about guiding the intense. Where did that come from?
Yeah. Yeah. One way, I'm familiar with intense because I was intense. And everybody was scared of my intensity, and I became scared of my intensity. And then as an adult throughout my life, I've had to fight to get my intensity back. If you woke up, to me, it's commensurate with life force. Some people just have more life force. And yes, it's not a bad word. And, if your life force disappeared tomorrow, would that impact your ability to have a fruitful life? Would it impact on your ability to live your dreams and live your passion?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you might not even be able to get out of bed if your intensity went away. We need our intensity. The last thing I want to do is infer to a child, well, you can't handle your intensity and neither can anybody else. We need to make it go away. So we're making this decision for you. By the way, you don't have any say in the matter. And, and then that kind of places a wedge between a child and their life force. And then they have a wobbly life. And I want to actually, instead of putting that wedge there, I want to grease the skids so they see the beauty of their own life force. They see the beauty of their intensity. So yeah, it is. To me, it's the perfect word. I think people can relate to that word, and it doesn't encounter the same, thrashing that more diagnostic words can have.
Now, do you feel that medication, in this case, stimulant drugs given to a child with, say, ADHD, that they do squash that life force, that they do create some kind of a pressure cooker that then has children express what they're dealing with through anger or defiance? Is that, you see that?
I can answer. It occurs to me I can answer that in two ways, and thanks for that question. It reveals your brilliance and your openness. So I do believe that at best it moderates intensity. It gives a false sense of improvement. So if I'm a parent of a child who's moderately improved because they're, I feel like they're holding on for dear life because this chemical reaction is coursing through them and they don't feel like their true self. If I'm a parent of a kid who's improved by way of that, then I'm less motivated to find answers. The child's less motivated to find their own inner strength to overcome and put the intensity to good use. So that's one way of somewhat answering your question. The other is, I did write something about this a long time ago called, I don't publicize this often, but it's called 100 Reasons to Avoid Ritalin Like the Plague. And, besides all the innocent, unintended secondary effects of medication, it was during the time of the movie Super Size Me. I'm sure you're familiar with it as a filmmaker.
Yep.
I talked to my friend, personal physician, about the fact that I'm writing this book, and we looked at each other and said, let's do a supersize me experiment. You know, can you prescribe Ritalin for me for 30 days or 15 days or 10 days? He said, I'm willing to do it for 10 days, but I need to give you a diagnosis. And then he asked me, you know, a handful of questions, and 10 minutes later I had a diagnosis and I had a prescription in my hand. So,
nice.
You know, wanted to be ethical. And then he saw me 5 times during 10 days or 4 times during 10 days. He was stunned by the physical impact it had on me. What I was stunned by was, and this is really more about my reluctance to medicate a child, is when I was on medication, I didn't know if I did something well, if it was me or the Ritalin. And I didn't know if I did something poorly, if it was me or the Ritalin. It took me out. It took my trust out from under me. It took my belief in myself out from under me. I had the luxury of knowing I was going to be off this in 10 days. And this weird thing is I didn't like how it made me feel, but I looked forward to the next dose anyway. It was a very strange thing. And the house was never so clean. You know, I could do rote things really well, but I actually put off all the important meetings and phone calls till this was over because I didn't trust myself to be grounded in my true being and to represent what I wanted to say in these meetings. So I am cautious. I'm hesitant to say we should take it out of the equation, medication. I do think there's kids who are so hyperkinetic that maybe they do need medication at the end of the day, at the end of if they still are hyperkinetic, even though they're improved relationally and they've adjusted. Some kids seem to maybe prosper from it. But, here's the last kicker is when a kid's on medication, before the meds kick in or after they wear off, the problems are still there. Nothing's improved. Nothing's transformed. The problems are still front and center. So nothing's changed. There's been zero healing. I happen to believe that symptoms are called for healing. Symptoms can be what gets parents to say, wow, I'm trying to be a good parent, but I need something more. Let me do some research and see if I get lucky. And, best case scenario, the parent finds something that takes them to a next level of relationship, seeing the greatness in their kid, and bingo, they hit the jackpot because they have their kid back, and bingo, they feel good about what they're doing, and the kids have their parent back. It's a win-win-win. So, that's it in a nutshell.
That's beautiful. I love how you, I heard a nuance there that I hadn't heard before, which is that you felt that your trust was pulled out from underneath you, and that you couldn't know if it was you or the medication that did something well or not. I think that's a beautiful distinction. Thank you for that. I actually did the same thing that you did. I recently had my own supersize me with Adderall and Ritalin, and I can relate to exactly what you.
Really?
Yep.
Tell me about it.
Well, I started on Adderall, extra release, and I was very focused. My wife even said I was more present with her. That was a bonus. But I couldn't sleep at night. I was up till 4 a.m. My brain just couldn't slow down. And so then they tried me the regular Adderall, not the extended, just a quick release or whatever it's called. That one worked for a while, but I started getting headaches. I started getting dehydrated very quickly. Some mornings I would wake up and I just had this migraine, almost throwing up. So I stopped that. Then I went to Ritalin. Ritalin for me was just, it was a brain foggy kind of drug where sometimes I'd be focused and sometimes I would not be focused. So probably Ritalin wasn't for me. I decided to not continue because I really didn't feel well. And I really felt that I don't want to mess with my body any longer. but it was a good way to know that's what I would give my child. And I wonder, I'm sure there's no studies, but I wonder how many parents that have medicated children have actually tried the drug. Because if it's really that harmless to a child, then a parent should have no problem taking it and just seeing what it does, so they can actually relate and say, the thing that you feel right after when you take it, don't worry, that goes away in a couple, right? So I think that should almost be mandatory. I don't know. That's reaching here, but why not?
Yeah. And Roman, in the normal, you have, what's the word I'm looking for? You have the empowerment as an adult to evaluate your, side effects, and to evaluate, your course of carving your own path, and you have jurisdiction over the final say. Most kids don't have a vote in this. So normally what will happen is a kid will have a loss of appetite, or they'll have an issue with sleeping. And then it, as you probably already know, it innocently becomes Ritalin or Adderall plus something for, the symptoms have, the medications have medication in a way. Mm-hmm. And before you know it, you're in a 3-ring circus. Then it's not unusual for a child to have anxiety or depression. I've been in a room when my daughter was born. I wanted to take a job that gave me the freedom to get home at 5:00. So I took a job as a case manager, and it was incumbent upon me to attend med reviews. I got to know 3 local child psychiatrists really well, who were really well-intended, smart people, but you could see the moments of the tumblers clicking in when they innocently started a meeting by saying, not tell me what's going well, but tell me how things are going. And if the parent dared say, well, my child's been a little anxious, or my child's been a little depressed, I actually have been in a room when the doctor said, well, maybe it's not ADHD, maybe it's bipolar disorder. So then you have a whole host of other more chronic things. I've seen other medication like Prozac or, other strong medications being proffered in the mix. And then, you're off to the races. I'll fast forward 10 years, becoming a friend of Bob Whitaker and Dr. Bregan and people you've come across, and being at conferences. And there was one conference just by fate where I was sitting at a table with 3 parents who had been represented as the expert witnesses, Dr. Bregan, who lost their kids to, it began with Ritalin or Adderall, and one, where they no longer had their kid because the kid committed suicide.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that's a common occurrence, but I just happened to, I'm going to call it given that experience so I could see what's at stake. One kid was test anxious. A young, probably a 10-year-old girl who was an A student and just striving and participated in everything at school, but was anxious. And whether it was Ritalin initially or some other, drug, she, like some kids, feel like they have bugs crawling inside their bloodstream, or they feel like they can't stop it. They can't make it go away. And I'd love to know what Robin Williams was feeling when he took his life. I'm sure, medications can easily make somebody feel like they just can't make whatever's troubling them stop, and something has just entered into their life that is holding them hostage, and it won't go away. And the only way out is that way out. And no amount of settlement is going to bring a kid back.
Right,
So
right.
the loss for these, parents, even if they've started a foundation in their child's name, even if they become, an outspoken voice for the sake of whatever, it was painful to experience that.
Wow.
And so there's a lot at stake. It's not so innocent.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's 100% agree. And I recently connected with a woman out of Australia named Susie O'Hare, and she has just written a book. Her book is called Heal the Mother, Heal the Child. And so very much aligned with what we're talking about. And her daughter was diagnosed at age 7 down in Australia, and later put on Prozac, Ritalin, then Prozac, and then a third medication. And then she started talking about death and had suicidal thoughts. She was 8 at the time. And so thankfully they pulled her off of it. They stopped, and she said that began her journey of really digging deep. And it breaks my heart, because I do research on ADHD online support groups on Facebook. Mm-hmm. And the amount of children that are on the parents that are on there talking about their children between the ages of 3 to 9 that are on 3 different medications with 3 different disorders it's 70% of all the parents on there have something like that at their hand. And I just,
that's my experience too, is a social worker in St. Louis said the average is probably 3 or 4 medications. It just within a year, within the first year.
That just, to me, and I'm asking you as a question, right? Like, for you, what do you think? What are we doing to our children? What effects could this have on not society, obviously, but on themselves as adults? Like, let's fast forward 16, 20 years from now. What are we creating?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're creating, I'll give an answer from 2 perspectives. We're creating a cohort of kids who are prone to feeling they need a crutch. They need something to get by. Nanette Lambert's work in Berkeley, longitudinal studies showed that these kids are twice as more prone to other drugs, stronger drugs, substance abuse. They're twice as prone to health, weakening health patterns like smoking and poor eating habits. I think, in my non-medical, non-scientific opinion, I think the body gets toxic and erodes. So I think we're creating a proneness, and I think we're creating, importantly, a cohort of people who don't believe in themselves the way they were born to believe in themselves. So let me entertain a weird theory is, if I got to play God for a day, and I wanted to save the planet, I probably would avoid one Messiah, because that usually doesn't work out well. I'd create a whole slew of people with more life force. I'd give great inspired parents like you kids with more intensity, and on the off chance that you foster that intensity, and then that child becomes a leader, that child becomes a voice, that child becomes a light by way of how they hold themselves, and they uphold other people in, not only inspired by the greatness that is alive in them, but the greatness they see in others. That's what I would, if I could wave my magic wand, that's what I would do. And so the risk to, in that, from that bigger weird picture, maybe weird, is that we're undermining that gift, where we're actually identifying the very kids who are here to help us, who have more of a chance to help us because they have greater life force. and we're taking them out at the knees. I think it's innocent. I don't think anybody's diabolical and going, okay, we're gonna undermine all the kids with more life force. They're bad people.
Right.
I just think we haven't caught up. There's lag between what we've known in terms of how to parent and then the beauty of how to parent kids with more intensity. It takes them a greater awareness and perspective and determination. It takes a different set of skills too.
I guess that's where that term conscious parenting comes in, right? Where people realize we are parenting, but perhaps unconsciously with rules or skills that were given to us by our parents who were also unconsciously parenting from their parents and so forth, right? So in essence,
absolutely.
We have to interrupt that pattern. Now, let me ask you a very rudimentary question, perhaps. So a lot of parents are concerned that their kids are going to be behind in school, right? A lot of these intense children, if they need therapy or they need to do an approach like yours, or most likely, unless you're telling me differently from your experience, are lagging behind in the traditional school system. Have you seen that change? Do they catch up? Do they just need a different environment? How do they, in the end, quote unquote, turn out? Because that's what most parents want, their children to turn out, right?
Yeah, and are you filtering in this moment in time with the online teaching, or?
I know we're at a crossroad here. I would say perhaps before that, perhaps sort of more the traditional going to school, and I know it's all changing, which is great as we speak. But traditionally, if let's say we go back to somewhat of a normal, and there's school again, and there are grades, and there are academic, requirements. What have you experienced yourself? Have you seen kids catch up, or take a different path, or what are you witnessing?
I actually have, and I'll factor in something, some additional criteria is that I think teachers enter into that endeavor with the best of all intentions. They wanna be of service. They want to convey curriculum, knowledge, wisdom, and they also want to build character in students. And my attempt to get the truth is that when they're at the School of Education, they're wide open, and they're given some lip service to here's how to help the average child, but here's how to help more intense children. But that has not been up to snuff. And the kids who come their way are, if I'm an intense child, I could maybe squeak by in my family, because it's only 2 kids or 3 kids or 1 kid, I'm getting, I'm getting enough crumbs, even if all they have is conventional parenting. But once I get to a bigger environment, I'm vying, and I'm acting out becomes my way of getting a relationship. It could easily happen. And if I'm an educator and I, with the best of intentions, all I get training on is how to work with normal kids by and large. And all of a sudden they feel an onslaught of these intense kids who are competing for relationship, then I'm out over my head, and all I could do is report to the school counselor and the administration. These 6 kids are in need of evaluation. It's really a setup for the teacher. Half of all new teachers quit the field, and that hurts. That we can't afford that. So to me, it's really part of answering your question is how do we guide teachers? I've now been doing these intensive trainings and trainings of trainers, and some of my work, a good part of my work has been in education. The people who show up looking for answers are administrators and educators. And I've now seen when that whole landslide that I've referred to now is rerouted and teachers are adequately trained for the kinds of kids they're encountering, the level of intensity they're encountering. And actually, the good news is it could be a completely, I am very hopeful. I've now seen whole schools, whole districts reroute how they interface with kids. And I haven't found this out yet, but I'm determined, Roman, to find out how that affects the call for evaluations and subsequently, the percentage of kids who wind up innocently in the crosshairs of diagnosis. And then, the way things are now, you get diagnosed ADHD, 90% of those kids wind up on medication because nobody knows any different. But when you create a different flow, you actually, I would love to wake up tomorrow and find out, in this Stevens Point school district that's now been doing this for 3 years, there's negligible, low or no referrals for ADHD and medication.
Wow.
Instead of it being the national average of 8, 10, 12%.
Right. It's interesting. I've had this hunch recently. Goes back to that metaphor of, if no one's there to hear it when a tree falls in the forest, right? Doesn't make a sound.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if parents weren't given a narrative through media, right, through advertising, what to look for, what symptoms to look for, and they weren't told that it's a disorder, would they still say, I think my child has ADHD? Probably not, because they might say, like back then with me when I grew up in Switzerland, my mom said, oh my God, he has so much energy and it never ends and he's all over the place, right? But there was no narrative that said, oh, your child may have this disorder. So I think we're doing we're doing the parents a disservice by broadcasting that narrative, and we're doing the kids a disorder by predisposing them to this label, right? It's like, sorry, kid, you got a lot of energy, it's coming, And so I just appreciate your work because you really dig into, first of all, the relationship between parents and children is the most important relationship, right? This nurture, the relationship that's forming there, and then obviously with the community. So I wanted to ask you, when you work with children and their parents, how do you separate? So are you in a room working with the parents and with the children? Are there moments where the children are not there because you got to talk to the parents and be frank about maybe what you're observing that's not working, their parenting style or in the marriage, or can you kind of just describe this fascinating world of the nurtured heart approach?
I was a clinician until I started until I wrote a book 20 years ago. And then I started doing a seminar tour, and it occurred to me I'd be a lunatic if I had I had to carry the responsibility of families and a caseload in addition to all that travel. So it's been a long time, but I do train a lot of clinicians, and I'd say in my personal work, I always wanted the kid in the room. The child knows everything I'm saying anyway. The child knows. It's almost like you could see in their eyes, they're cheering me on. Yay, get my parent to do that. Yay. And when their parents, and I would be doing a parallel process with the parent because they're really my client. If anything's going to change, it's not because I'm tagging along with the kid all day. It's because the essential milieu of the home has changed or the classroom has changed. So I am cheering the parent on. I'm being deeply appreciative of the parent. I'm trying to get them to take a step, and then I'm applauding them for the step they're taking. And I've watched how the children respond, and there's been no disconnect at all having the kid there. That said, some of my colleagues who I train work entirely with kids. And there are one colleague who's created quite a stir in the therapy world. There's a podcast I could send you, Dr. Elizabeth Sylvester. She makes it imminent that to be a client of mine, you have to take a online class on this nurtured heart approach to get in the door, and then I'll work with you and your child in support of that going forward. But you need to pre-qualify by taking this by taking this approach and running with it, and everything in between. So I don't think there's one set way. Mm-hmm. But I think what I'm most proud of these days is that there's been larger tests of this, like the state of New Jersey system of care. Back when I was a clinician, we'd have kids who were case managed, level 2 kids, but then the more expensive kids who were burdens to the system because nobody could handle them, in out of home, in home. They became wards of the state by being in group homes or in residential treatment care. The state of New Jersey's system of care that represents all the foster, all the adoptive, and all the kids in out-of-home placements, they adopted Nurtured Heart approach. It's part of through Rutgers University. It's 5 years now, and wow. They've had a tremendous regard and outcome in terms of how a stronger approach that's geared to more intense kids can actually make an essential difference in how these kids emerge from the system, how they get back reunited to their families, how they can affect the cost equation to the state, the liability to the state. There's no more takedowns, there's no more holds, no more putting staff and kids at risk, or that's negligible now. And the kids, instead of having, it used to be a third of the kids in that system would wind up incarcerated, a third wound up homeless, and a third wound up marginal. Not to say there weren't kids who wound up having great lives, but they were the exceptions. Now there's so many more outcomes that are strong in kids, getting back to their core sense of believing in themselves. So, this has been put to the test a little bit. And now a couple of other states are following in the footsteps of New Jersey. So it started out as my work with ADHD, but it's gone in two directions that that have my interest. One is the kids who are higher level, and the kids who are the kids who aren't acting out, the kids who are just plodding along in a normal way. And then I began to question, can we up their game too? Can we take a kid who's not having any drama and help them flourish and thrive at a greater level too? Mm-hmm. I think our kids, you look like a person who is very child-centered and very, you referenced your love language and of appreciation. You that doesn't drop from the sky. That comes from your heart. That comes from you caring deeply, probably you care how your kids enter into the world and how they thrive. And I think we can't take what our parents gave us as a legacy of parenting, because our world is wound a little tighter. And there's a lot more stress going on in the world, and there's a lot more intensity inherent in the world. So maybe we just simply need to just in general up our game. That's what I'm hoping for.
And honoring, when you said there's more intensity in the world, people that can handle that intensity are those with the intensive life force, and if we squash their potential or their life force, then we run the risk of making them into more obedient, children and adults that eventually can be what I call replaced by artificial intelligence, because they just do what you tell them to do repeatedly, So
yeah.
The ADHD children will survive because you can't predict them. They're too impulsive. What is he doing now? I don't know. Now he's over there. Now he's over there. Can't copy that, right? That's my little future theory. Why?
Well, that's an incredible future theory. I think you're onto something, a filter that allows you to see that we want our kids to be unique and irreplaceable.
Yeah. I think we could end with those words. That was beautiful, Howard. Well, I just I want to thank you for taking me on a little journey through the nurtured heart approach, and also want to acknowledge you for being a force out there, for a stand for relationships, especially between parents and children. And I think we're in the same camp and the same boat. And I know our paths will cross again, but I just want to thank you for your time for this interview. And I really hope our listeners will also look up some of the links that I'm going to share in the show notes, how to learn more about the nurtured heart approach and about yourself and your books. I'm just really excited to share this with the world. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Roman. And I appreciate your great level of perspective and your great level of honoring children, and it reveals the great love in your heart. And I can end with that. I thank you for a beautiful way of interviewing and creating space for me to share.
Thank you.